Great. Thanks so much, Economic Times team. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all attendees. Quick introduction. I am Rohan Dhamija. I'm the partner in charge of the India practice. With me is Sameer Gupta, who's the Senior Engagement Manager with us and has been a key contributor towards the analysis that we will share. Without further ado, if we dive right into the deck, we'll start out with a quick 2-minute introduction to the firm, for the benefit of those that we haven't met in person or spoken to, and then dive right into the analysis. So introduction to the firm, hopefully my screen is seen by all participants. We are the world's largest telecoms only strategy consulting firm. We've got 14 offices across the world, and in Asia, the Asia region is headed out of our New Delhi office, with additional offices out of Singapore and Dubai. Our clients, of course, include the usual suspects such as fixed and mobile operators, tower companies, regulatory bodies, as well as financial institutions invested in telecoms and media companies. A little about the contributors towards this outside-in analysis that we developed a little while back. The analysis was primarily led by myself, Sameer, and another of our colleagues, Ashwinder Sethi. It was extensively supported by our global team of experts, specifically Tim Harabin, who's been a former Vodafone board member, as well as Ian Struhl, who's our costing and pricing practice head globally. And as many of you know, Sandeep Das, who's one of our colleagues at Analysis Mason now, has joined us. However, he joined us after this analysis was put together. So this analysis truly remains an outside-in analysis. So that's about us. And Sandeep would obviously be joining us for some of our webinars that would follow on spectrum strategy and digital services strategy later in March. Okay, great. So I think I would probably skip the executive summary of this analysis, because I think it'll be a little more interesting if we first share our approach and build the story towards the results slowly and steadily over the next 45 minutes. And then we can obviously open up for Q&A and refer back to the executive summary section as the audience deems fit. So if you can see my screen here, just a quick introduction to the approach we took and what we really tried doing here. So it was really a 3-step approach. In step 1, we tried quantifying how our Jio's cost per GB, and then Sameer will get into how the cost per GB was calculated, but how our Jio's cost per GB compared to that of an incumbent operator's cost per GB. How it compared at equal market shares, as well as how it might change dynamically as Jio gained market share or lost market share, and potentially the incumbent lost market share. So basically we treated the cost per GB as a dynamic element, given the fixed cost nature of the telecoms business, and then saw how it might change with changes in market share positions. Step 2 then, post developing an understanding of Jio's cost per GB, we tried developing 3 specific and finite price disruption scenarios that Jio could come into the market with in a way where its price, despite the disruption, still remains higher than its cost per GB. So put another way, we ensured that the scenarios that we were modeling in this wargaming scenario were all profit accretive for Jio. So in that sense, we came up with 3 price disruption scenarios for Jio based on its cost per GB. And within that step, basis a detailed econometric and elasticity analysis, we tried figuring out what kind of market share loss would happen for the incumbent under each of those price disruption scenarios by Jio. And obviously, market share loss would lead to 2 results. One, obviously, because of a lower subscriber base, and especially profitable subscriber base, an incumbent would lose profits. Also, because it will have to amortize its fixed cost over a smaller subscriber base because of the lost market share, it would lead to a higher cost per GB for the incumbent, and hence both of those would act as a double whammy and lead to a significant profit erosion for an incumbent. So that really was step 2. Step 3 then finally was to basically try and develop an understanding on, given the incumbent operator's dynamics, what an optimal pricing response or a pricing preemptive strategy for the incumbent might be. Now, do note please that Jio would hit the market just with a 4G play, whereas the incumbent has a 3G layer or a 3G subscriber base that it can sell to, as well as a 4G subscriber base that it will go after. So any price changes that the incumbent makes, we assume that it will make to its 4G data plans, but also to its 3G data plans, because it will never price 4G lower than its 3G data plans. So really, in that sense, the incumbent has the ability to fight back not only with its 4G pricing, but also with its 3G pricing. So that's really step 3. So just to summarize, step 1, understanding the cost per GBs. Step 2, setting up price disruption scenarios for RGO and seeing what kind of market share and profit impacts those scenarios have on an incumbent. Step 3, econometrically trying to assess what the optimal pricing response or pricing preemption for an incumbent could be in this sample circle. Just for avoidance of doubt, this analysis is done just for one sample circle. It can obviously be extended to all 22 circles. Also, please note that this analysis, the way it's going to be presented right now, since some of the materials could be treated as confidential, what we are presenting right now publicly only includes disruption on data packages. It does not include an impact on site. So really the analysis around voice and how that might sit in with the data price disruption can be added on top of the analysis that's going to be presented. Also note certain assumptions that have gone into the analysis. One, this analysis is assuming a 4-player 4G market in the sample circle. 2, it assumes that Jio comes into the disruption and tries to assess how the incumbent responds. It does not try to do wargaming scenarios around all 4G players doing various price disruptions. And 3, it does not include the impact of a forward-looking spectrum strategy. For example, both for RGO and the incumbent, it assumes current 4G spectrum holdings in that sample circle and does not assume what could happen if a 700 megahertz band was acquired by one or more operators within the 4G domain. So in that sense, the analysis has consciously been built in a modular way. Hopefully, it still remains interesting with its current limitations that we share today, but obviously can be built into something much more complete and holistic in case there is interest. All right, great. So then let's get into each of the steps. Let's start with step 1 on how we really calculated cost per GB for both Jio and incumbent. Cost per GB basically takes into account both CAPEX and OPEX, and CAPEX includes network and spectrum CAPEX. And then that gets divided by the traffic we forecast each operator would run on its network under various market share scenarios. That truly gives the cost per GB in a dynamic fashion at various market share scenarios. What were our results for the comparative cost per GB analysis for RGO and the incumbent in the sample circle? At similar market share, so if you assume it's a 4-player 4G market in the circle, then a similar or a fair market share for each of the 4 players would be 25% of the 4G market. And at same market shares of 25% per player, our analysis tells us that Jio's cost per GB would be lower than the incumbent's cost per GB. So at a fair market share of 25% each for Jio and the incumbent, we feel that Jio's cost per GB would be around 159 rupees per GB, whereas the incumbent's cost per GB would be around 183 rupees per GB. So there will be almost a 15% lower cost per GB that Reliance Jio would benefit from. And obviously, as Jio gains market share in excess of 25% due to price disruption and the incumbent loses market share, its cost per GB will go down and the incumbent's cost per GB will go up. Now, what really drives a lower cost per GB for Jio versus the incumbent? If you look at the slide that I'm projecting right now, it's primarily driven by a lower network OPEX for Reliance Jio versus the incumbent. Now, why is the network OPEX lower despite the incumbent being able to overlay its 4G network on the 3G network? Two reasons there. One, we feel Jio has a significantly more power efficient network. And two, we feel for full tenancy sites, looking at some of the MLAs that Jio has signed with the tower companies, its tower rentals are sometimes slightly lower than what the incumbent signed at. And obviously this is just a sample incumbent, so in various circles for various operators, the story might pan out differently. So in that sense, driven by a lower network OPEX, Jio's cost per GB ends up being marginally lower than the incumbent's cost per GB at similar market share positions in the 4G market. Also note please that for the incumbent, the way we've calculated cost per GB is that we've done the fully loaded cost per GB for both the 3G and the 4G network, and then allocated a portion of those costs to the 4G network, depending on the amount of traffic that the 4G network carries. Why it's important to do full allocation of 3G and 4G and then allocate a portion to 4G and not just take 4G as a marginal cost for the incumbent is because, remember, basis this cost per GB, the incumbent will not only have to price its 4G data, but also have to price its 3G data. So really, it's both a boon and a menace potentially for the incumbent, where it benefits, but also potentially needs to keep in mind the fact that it has a legacy 3G network and it can't do 4G pricing independent of its 3G pricing. That's a little about cost per GB. Moving on then, step 2 was really to get the elasticity analysis and the econometric analysis into play and see at various price disruption scenarios what kind of market share would Jio be able to gain. For the sake of brevity, I haven't shared the full detailed elasticity analysis that the team worked on over a couple of weeks here. But conceptually, what we're trying to show on this slide is that due to price disruption, there would be two impacts that would be coming into the market. One, the price disruptor, Jio in this example, will be able to gain higher than fair share, so higher than 25% of the market share in a 4G, in a 4-player 4G market, due to price elasticity. Two, also due to a lower price per GB, the price disruptor will be able to expand the 4G market from the initially estimated 4G market at a cost or a price per GB of 250 or now 200 rupees per GB. So as it drops down the prices, it expands the market and also takes a greater than fair share of the market. So there are really two additive impacts that are coming into play. And that's really what this slide points out. The next slide is relatively interesting. So basis this concept that we just discussed, what we see on the left of the current slide being projected is that at a 0% price disruption, if we said both the product and price of all 4 4G operators in that circle was equal, then obviously everyone will get fair share at 25% each. If Jio came in with a 20% price disruption scenario, it'll get to a share of 38% of the 4G market. At 30% price per GB disruption, it'll get to a share of 44% of the 4G market. And at 40% price disruption, it'll get to almost a 50% share of the 4G market, which obviously will get translated into an overall CMS and RMS of the overall 2G plus 3G plus 4G market. But figures here are calculated just for the 4G market, just in that circle, in the sample circle we're talking about, basis the cost per GB of the players as well as basis the detailed affordability and elasticity analysis for telecom population within that circle. Now remember, this is obviously a slightly theoretical starting point for the analysis, because it's never going to happen that Jio comes in with the price disruption and none of the other incumbents respond, right? In a typical pricing strategy, for every action there is always, sometimes not an equal, but with some kind of a reaction from the other incumbent players in the market. So truly this really is a starting point. But this just basically shows the results of the first step, that under different price disruption scenarios, basis elasticity and market expansion, what kind of market shares would Jio be able to get to? The chart on the right then clearly shows that at those market shares and at those price disruption scenarios, even at a lower price per GB, Jio would still be very profitable in that circle if the incumbents didn't respond. This will obviously change if it led to a complete data war, tariff war, and all incumbents responded, so on and so forth, which is something that we analyze in greater detail later in the analysis. So that's basically the results of the elasticity analysis. Now, what happens when an incumbent loses market share due to a new entrant's price disruption? Two things happen, as I mentioned earlier. One, it loses highly profitable and valuable high-end 3G and 4G users who Jio poaches, who the new entrant poaches because of a better pricing. Two, for the guys that still stay on this incumbent's network, the fixed cost of the incumbent gets amortized over a smaller base, and hence cost per GB for the remaining subscribers goes up. So really, it's a two-pronged effect on the bottom line or profitability of the incumbent operator. The next slide then shows that under various price disruption scenarios, each of the charts is the 20, 30, and 40% price disruption scenario by Jio respectively. What percent of its total profit in that circle could an incumbent lose if it did not respond? And really, despite the higher price per GB, because of market share losses as well as a higher cost per GB, at 20% price disruption, the incumbent will lose 15% of its profits. At 20%, it will lose 16% of its profits. At 30%, it will lose 24% of its profits. At 40% price disruption by the new entrant, it will lose 1/3 or 33% of its profit. Now remember, this is percent of total profit, not just 4G profit. So an incumbent could potentially lose up to 1/3 of its total profit in a circle over the next 3 to 5 years. So we're not even analyzing a long-term impact. The long-term impact will be much more drastic. Also, we're not taking into account the disruption that voice being bundled for free within a data package could bring in, because again, then the voice revenues really start getting eaten up. So even at the most basic and simple level within a circle, an incumbent potentially has up to 1/3 of its profit pools at stake if price disruption does happen. So going on to step 3 then. Obviously, the incumbent is not going to sit still on this and look to lose almost 1/3 of its profit pools. The incumbent is going to fight back by its own updated pricing strategy or by preempting pricing strategy. Now, what we feel is that even by lowering its price per GB in response to Jio, if it does it smartly and it does it in a scientific and econometric fashion, by looking at various customer segments and by mapping various data packs to various customer segments, while taking elasticity, consumer behavior, and market expansion and affordability into account, we feel that an incumbent will actually be able to claw back a lot of the profit erosion by not matching but rather giving a lower price discount than what Jio is giving. So for example, in a 20% price disruption scenario by Jio, an incumbent could claw back most of its profit erosion, about 80-85% of its profit erosion, by giving just about a 15-16% price per GB discount. So not matching the 20%, but by giving a slightly lower price discount. Now, why is the incumbent able to claw back a portion of its profit loss because of despite giving a lower than Jio price discount? It's basically because of two reasons. One, there is a certain stickiness in an incumbent's customer base, given it's already been around, and there'll be some sort of loyalty which we've tried analyzing across customer segments. And two, because as it lowers its 4G price, it is also able to lower its 3G price, assuming that 4G and 3G data prices will remain same. And what that does is that in conjunction with playing in the 4G market, at a lower 3G price, it also expands the 3G market and enables a certain 2G to 3G diffusion. And as most of us know, 3G ARPUs and 3G realizations are higher than 2G. Hence, the profit per GB on 3G could be higher for the incumbent than on 2G. So not only does it fight back by a lower price on 4G, but also by offering the same low price on 3G and hence expanding the 3G market. Hence, it's able to claw back most of or a major portion of its profit erosion at a lower than new entrant price discount. And the next couple of slides basically just show that. For example, at 20%, it can claw back 85% of its profit erosion at 15%. For 30%, that number is about 18%. And this slide just basically talks about the changes in cost per GB, in price per GB, and in market shares when the incumbent fights back. Now, folks, I would like to close this presentation by saying a couple of things. Obviously, for sake of simplicity, what we're presenting right now, as I mentioned previously, is just changes in the data tariffs. We haven't incorporated changes in the voice tariffs or the impact of packaging and bundling into this analysis. We also haven't consciously brought in the fact that how this analysis might look when it's done on a pan-India basis built on a bottoms-up model of 22 circles, and also not taken into account a forward-looking spectrum strategy on how spectrum acquisition in the 700 band or in the 800 band as done by Jio already in certain circles. So how the sub 1 gigahertz band might change the equations for or against the incumbent or the new entrant. So with that, we're at about the halfway mark. I know we finished a little sooner than expected, but let me open up for Q&A or get comments from the audience. And then if there are specific items that we need to go into in more detail, happy to do so through the remaining 30 minutes. Danish and Keshav? Okay,
the questions are already shared.
Great. So what's the 4G overall market in the context of market share? Sure. Do you want to pull that out, Sameer?
So I think by 2017 or 2018, we are expecting around 120 million 4G subscribers pan-India.
Around the 2020 mark, about 100 million subscribers pan-India. Obviously, our 4G market estimates, or rather any technology market estimates, are based on a pretty detailed analysis. We do significant regression analysis as well as triangulate our results on a circle-by-circle basis using international benchmarks of various technology adoptions, depending on affordability, depending on telecom spend, so on and so forth. But to answer the first question, it's about 100 million odd 4G subs around the 2020 mark. Okay, moving on to the next question. The next question says, what is the basis of saying 20%, 30% and 40% discount? So as we mentioned, if we go back to the presentation, the 20, 30 and 40% discounts are basically hypothetical scenarios, folks, but they are based on the fact that we've done a sanity check in the background to check whether at 20, 30 and 40% the price per GB for Jio stays higher than their cost per GB. So remember, when we say 20, 30, 40% discount, we are discounting it off the prevailing price per GB of about 200 to 250 rupees per GB average across operators and across various packs. So really 20, 30, 40% is a discount on that around 200 to 250 rupees per GB. And in the background, the sanity check that's being done is to ensure that Jio's price per GB remains higher than its cost per GB at those price destruction levels. Okay, the next question is around safely concluding that the value proposition here is commoditized and it's only about price discounts. Absolutely not. This is a very, very interesting point that Nitin raises from the audience. Absolutely not, Nitin. It's not about commoditization at all. It's for sake of simplicity and given the time that we had for this webinar, we have purposely kept the product differentiation as well as the packaging differentiation separate from the pricing piece. The full wargaming analysis that was done over a course of 8 to 12 weeks had dimensions of price disruption, product differentiation, as well as packaging and bundling differentiation. So what we're discussing right now is just one of the layers of the wargaming analysis. But when we looked at all three layers in conjunction, interesting to note that we found out that this is not at all a commoditized product. Product differentiation and the way bundling and packaging is done across various segments is at least as important as price disruption. And especially when you start taking voice bundling along with data, as well as bundling of digital services and basically digital payments along with the data plans, it's not a commoditized market at all. So quite a few insights around that. Happy to share separately over email or just offline if there's interest. Okay, how capable are the incumbents' networks to handle higher data volume, assuming that RJO will significantly increase data consumption per sub? Well, that's a tough one to answer. I think as we stand now, that answer varies significantly across circles and across operators. But if you look at the top 3 to 4 operators in each circle, I would say rather just the top 3 operators in each circle, I think they are already making quite a lot of headway and are very positive about making additional capex investments in their networks. So even if the networks aren't fully supported just yet, by the time the 4G market becomes mature in a year, 2 years, 3 years time, the networks will absolutely be there. So in that sense, we think networks, given how much each of the operators, the incumbents as well as the new entrant, are investing and thinking about networks, might not necessarily be a significant differentiator. There might be differences across circles, but really product and pricing could be. Okay. Next question is basically. Next question is another interesting one. We get that a lot through our work with various operators. So basically, it tries to check on whether leapfrogging would happen or not. When we did similar analysis some time back, we were less optimistic or we were less bullish about leapfrogging happening because device prices were at a certain point, tariffs were at a certain point. Now, with the steep fall in 4G device prices, when we reran our affordability analysis or total cost of ownership analysis, as we call it on our end, where we basically try on the supply side analyzing what the device and a tariff price together would mean for a consumer, and then try comparing it to the affordability by decile of population in a circle. What we found out now is that the delta between 3G and 4G prices, as that continues to reduce, there could be a more bullish case for leapfrogging. Okay. Next question is, hi, what will be the power consumption for 4G modules and how it affects O&M? The top of my head, it is built into the model and happy to take that offline. We have a technical team that works in this and happy to have them answer that based on analysis. Based on analysis, when you see RJO break even at EBITDA and PAT levels, very interesting. Do we have that handy, Sameer?
For PAT break even?
See, really, I don't think there's one simple answer for that, and that's where the fact that this analysis has been set up in a war gaming, in a game theory format is what's quite interesting. Sure. Because really the break even of Jio is equally dependent on its own price disruption as it is on what the incumbents respond with. So if Jio did price disruption and the incumbents did non-scientific, with due respect, price disruption from there, and it became just an absolute bloodbath, then I think everyone's break-even will get really pushed out and it will really become a bloodbath. However, if the pricing, product differentiation, packaging was done in a scientific and econometric way, then under various scenarios of incumbent responses as well as Jio scenarios, that number could be very different. But what I could say is that it is going to be a relatively longish break-even. It is going to vary significantly across circles, depending on how ready different circles are for 4G. And the number could be anywhere between 5, 10, 12 years. In certain circles, actually, probably even sooner.
Yeah, and in circles like metro, where 4G uptake is likely to be faster, the EBITDA break-even could be in like next 2 to 3 years.
But again, it depends on the incumbent response, right? Preemption.
Of course, and the price disruption that RG offers.
And again, on how the product differentiation plays out with the bundling of digital payments, with the bundling of voice, and potentially voice being given away, and the combination of VoLTE voice versus VoIP versus circuit switched voice. Okay. So the next question is, have we considered brand loyalty and stickiness within incumbents? We absolutely have, probably, and I apologize if didn't bring it about in an emphatic enough manner. The reason that there is significant stickiness, the reason why there is the fact that incumbents have a 3G and a 4G layer are really the drivers of why an incumbent could fight back with a lower than competitive price discount and still claw back a lot of its profits. And then obviously the product differentiation layer comes in, which we haven't discussed as part of this webinar.
And the elasticity analysis that we did for price disruption includes all those factors like brand stickiness, loyalty to a particular operator and stuff like that.
That's right. Okay, the next question comes from the Economic Times team. Given that voice is still a dominant product in terms of revenues, will VoLTE be beneficial? And absolutely, our emphatic view is VoLTE will be very beneficial, especially with carrier aggregation happening, especially with all the standards coming across in VoLTE over the last 2 or 3 years. VoLTE can truly offer a cost advantage to Jio. I've done some test calls in VoLTE, and then the quality is coming out to be fantastic. The technical parameters are coming out to be fantastic. So absolutely, VoLTE I think will play a big part in all of this analysis. And when we've added the voice layer in our wargaming dashboard, we've seen that VoLTE has a significant impact on how the equation pans out between the incumbents and the new entrant. Okay. Most of the operators have gone for network mono, also for incumbents. So the next question is around how we've done our cost allocation while calculating cost per GB. So the question tries to ask on whether we've taken 2G, 3G and 4G costs, including 2G, 3G, 4G spectrum costs, and then allocated a portion to 4G. And as I said, yes, that's how we've done it. We've first drawn a distinction between data and voice. Within data, we've taken 3G plus 4G, and within 3G, 4G networks also, we've separated out voice costs and data costs, depending on the traffic, and then we've allocated a portion of cost to 4G. So for the incumbent, since it has a 3G network and since it needs to look at its cost per GB and price its price per GB for 4G while keeping its 3G price and cost in mind, hence this fully loaded cost of 3G plus 4G and then an allocation according to traffic to 4G. Okay, the next question is, can we expect totally free voice service by Reliance Jio along data service, bundling precisely in your analysis, your key assumption that all files make rational choices of small will you provide something which... Okay, the first question touches upon whether our analysis assumes rational behavior by customers, that every small price change leads to a market share erosion. Yes and no. Okay. We based our elasticity analysis on years of data that the firm has gathered in a proprietary fashion. Again, customer decisions are not always rational, and our elasticity analysis is based on real data, basis customer reactions to various price changes in the market over the last couple of years. It truly tries to build in customer elasticity in a realistic way. Second question was whether RGO can offer something that the incumbents can't. Well, that's a little hard to say. I don't think it'll be fair for me to comment on that. Both the incumbents and Reliance Jio are working extremely hard on developing the products layer and the digital services layer, along with developing the right pricing and packaging strategy and developing the right networks to run all of this on. So really that I think remains for all of us to figure out as the networks go live over the next couple of months. Okay. I'll pause here for a couple of minutes and give the audience a little more time to basically see if there are additional questions. Getting a couple of more questions. Okay, that's an interesting one. Seems to be a bit unfair to load 3G and GSM cost to 4G for incumbents. Good point, Raghavan, if I may call out our friends in the audience by name. We debated this significantly internally. That's where we pulled in our colleagues Tim Harabin and Ian Strulian, sits out of our London office and has close to about 35 years of costing and pricing experience. Really, as I mentioned, we have no bias towards an incumbent versus a Jio. The reason we think that an incumbent needs to look at its cost per GB and its price per GB from a fully loaded, when I say fully loaded, I'm not including 2G here. I'm just adding up the 3G and 4G costs and then allocating a portion of the cost to 4G. The reason it needs to look at it as a conjunction of 3G and 4G and then allocation to 4G is because whatever pricing decision it takes on 4G, basis its cost per GB on 4G, it'll have to follow suit on 3G as well. So I don't think 4G pricing and costing analysis can be done independent of an incumbent's 3G network. Okay. Incrementally, we are already selling greater than 150 million handsets, which are 4G and probably increasing at a faster rate.
I think 150 million handsets for 4G is a little aggressive. We haven't seen.
We haven't seen those numbers. 150 sounds a little aggressive. Absolutely agree that our forecast on 4G as presented right now. So actually the number exactly is about 100 odd million in 2018 or 2019. I think there's a fiscal versus calendar year difference. So about 3 to 4 years, not necessarily 2020, I stand corrected. But yeah, I agree that 100 million could be conservative. Why we've erred on the side of trying to be conservative is that doing sensitivity analysis and changing 100 to 150 or 200 or whatever that number is a relatively simple task. But given the history of adoption in India and similar countries, given the time that India took to come up this curve on 3G, despite how many 3G handsets were already in the market, we felt that as a base case, probably better to err on the side of being conservative rather than aggressive. RJ's ability to offer discount cuts, so any regulatory impediments to RJ cutting prices. Well, I think the net neutrality debate is still a little different. I think on the intranet networks, on closed plans, try this rule today that there wouldn't be too much regulation coming in. And we personally believe that on closed plans, really packaging and bundling should be the creative prerogative of the operators and not really for the regulator to look into. Also, price disruptions would be better for the end consumer, so can't see the regulator having a big problem with that. But as I said, blind price reduction, blind data tariff wars is not something we are in favor of at all. Rather, a detailed customer segmentation, a detailed product differentiation layer, and then an econometric analysis on how to price and bundle voice and data in a smart way to various segments is what really we're suggesting here. Both of the new entrant as well as Jio. Moving on to the next question. This is an interesting question that comes up a lot of times as well. So if price cut could really expand the market and help operators gain market share, why are people not doing it right now? Well, one, the market has been disrupted, so who would not like to sit on a higher profit pool? Two, it's not blind price cuts that we're talking about here, but rather step one is to do product differentiation and try and preserve ARPUs. Step two is to try and segment the market and then do econometric tariff revisions. And really what our analysis shows is that on doing that, the ARPUs per customer, especially when you put in the bundling of digital services and voice, actually go up but not down for an RGO if this is done right. So really in that sense, affordability needs to be taken into account also, and what needs to be taken into account and what's not been discussed in detail is what happens if Jio discounts and all the other operators discount. Then it just becomes a bloodbath and no one gains. So really that layer, right now we just spoken about Jio and one incumbent. The full dashboard of analysis that we've done on our end talks about all 4G players doing various things and really like coming out with the best scenario from there. Okay.
Sorry for interrupting. Request you to read out the questions also so that everyone can understand.
Fair enough. Sorry about that. Okay, the next question is from a network perspective. One of our friends in the audience points out, and very rightly so, that it took almost 1 year to stabilize 3G networks. Do we perceive a similar situation with 4G as well? Absolutely. That's why in the background when we forecast our 4G market, really it takes into account how much time networks take to stabilize, and probably that's one of the reasons that drives the conservative view of about 100 million a couple of years out rather than a larger market. Okay, I think those were basically the questions. Why don't we give it another couple of minutes and see if there are additional questions? Otherwise, obviously, we're available over email as well as happy to take conversations offline. Either Danish or the Economic Times team could pass on our contact information. And then we'll go from there. Okay, so let's pause for a couple of minutes and see if there are additional questions. Okay, now the question comes in checking if we've taken into account non-telecom revenues for Jio. Specifically, if we've taken into account broadband, cloud, enterprise, and then other related tangential revenues. The answer is in the full analysis we have. Some of those numbers are unfortunately proprietary to various stakeholders, but in this analysis, what we just shared, no, we have not. This is purely a telecoms, and even within telecoms, purely just a data play sample analysis that we've shared. Okay, the next question comes around what happens if the price discounts are higher than 40%. I think why we capped it at 40%, folks, is because post a certain discount level, the cost benefit starts diminishing. So it's a point of diminishing return. Now, I don't know whether that point of diminishing returns Sameer was at 48% or 44%. We don't remember the exact number.
It was around 45% or so.
But really, like the price then becomes so low, and then the incremental elasticity curve or elasticity benefits and affordability benefits of market expansion become not as high as the price goes low. So really, that's why it was capped at about 40%. This is a very interesting question. What happens if IoT gets integrated into the entire scenario analysis? That is actually one thing we haven't thought through, Ashutosh. We were actually currently doing some separate work around IoT for an operator here. So sure, but unfortunately and honestly haven't built that into the analysis yet. Okay, Danish and Keshav, hopefully we've addressed most of the questions, and this was interesting for the audience group. Given that it is about 2:50, I know we still have about 10 minutes, but unless folks have more questions, we'll probably hand it back to the Economic Times team and thank everyone for their time today.
I request you to take a couple of more questions.
Okay, sure. So next question focuses on how Jio's initial promise of a 3,000 rupee 4G phone has still not been met, and then if that's not met, could that have an impact on subscriber uptake by Jio? Answer is yes, absolutely. Some of this analysis does take into account what was discussed with various stakeholders, including Jio, and then the 3,000 rupee device, or rather device affordability, is a key driver of the 4G market. So that does not come into play, then truly it changes all of that. Another question around V1 upcoming auction on 700 megahertz. Great question, Brijesh. That's actually our next webinar, which is on March 4th. We'll be sharing a full sample analysis on what we think of the 700 megahertz price, whether it's expensive or not, whom it might make sense for to acquire, so on and so forth. So we would be very happy to discuss that in greater detail on March 4th. And we'll actually be bringing some of our spectrum experts from our European offices as well to touch upon their experience there. Next question is around eSIMs. Yeah, I think it definitely would have an impact on competition. Don't necessarily have a house view on when it gets approved, but yes, we will absolutely impact the market scenario. Yeah. Okay, next question is around whether we see Jio emerging as a significant handset player to create an ecosystem for VoLTE handsets, or will they have to wait for other handset manufacturers? I think it's going to be a combination of both, Anoop. As you've probably noticed with the live phones, they're already doing a bit of that. I think given the dynamics in the Indian value chains, we'll jump in here. I think the market will push and stand up on its own if there is demand for 4G products. So I think it's a chicken and an egg problem. I think part of it will have to be pushed by Jio to begin with, but really for it to hit mass market, I think the handset manufacturers will have to support this cause as well.
Yeah, and that's been happening. We are seeing over the last few years where prices of 4G devices have dropped significantly, right?
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.